And this is the cutie. This is NASA 427. She is the one that NASA had for a bunch of years. She flew virtually flawlessly. And she is a military and a civilian workhorse. She is built by Lockheed. She is a C-130 Quebec model, which is a Navy derivative. And her effective altitudes for special ops at night are somewhere between 200 feet AGL in the dark to flight level 270, which is 27,000 feet when she's at lighter gross weights. Her max speed that I've seen is 0.5 Mach, which is pretty fast, but it was in a horrendous jet stream at altitude, so that was part of it. Slowest speed can match and even be less than a Mercedes-Benz on the German Autobahn. When I was stationed in the 7th Special Ops in Germany, flying these with my wife Nancy, we were in Rhine-Main, Germany, and occasionally she'd say, "Hey, Chris, I saw you flying today," and I'd say, "Yeah, where?" She goes, "Well, I don't know. I was on the Autobahn. I waved as I passed." So she still does that. She still reminds me about that. She said, "Use that today because it's true." But it works best in the fiery heat of Desert Storm. 110, 115, 120 degrees outside air temperature, and the cold freeze, rescuing a nurse suffering from breast cancer in the winter Arctic of Antarctica. So much for the Herc, though, in general. NASA 427 enjoyed its research projects with Boreas, especially in the 96 year time frame, and so did I. I saw my first Prince Albert winter in March of 96, when car heaters still needed to be desperately plugged in. Walking through the snow required a 10-inch foot lift, and the winds made takeoffs and landings very simple as long as you were turned directly into the wind. George Postel and I were the pilots on the first crew that came in March. Bonnie Maxfield was our mission manager. Bonnie was a terrific gal who ran a great mission and loved singing Desperado a cappella in the hotel stairwell with everybody one landing below for the best sound. And that was always after happy hour. The two things she told me, though, were, "You're going to enjoy Boreas, and you're really going to like Pierce and Forrest." And she was right. Now, Pierce assumed flight lead every day in eyeball, as you saw in the pictures, and he'd take off, he'd go out, he'd fly around, look at the clouds, radio back at go and no-go, based on what the cloud layer was, and as many times as it would go, it was also a no-go. And his call sign, of course, was eyeball. In the evenings, our crew would drive up to where he would hold his meetings, I think somewhere up around Candle Lake, as I recall. It's been a while, but we'd see what each scientist had gotten for the day. Pierce was always gracious and outgoing, even if he wasn't always satisfied. And tomorrow always seemed to be the day everything would get better. We flew 7 missions for Pierce that month for 12.6 hours. Along the way, one of our experimenters, Dave Rabine, saved the hotel computer in Prince Albert, where we were staying, from corruption when a desk clerk accidentally erased all the guest files from the entire computer. For that, Dave drank for 2 weeks free. During the course of our March stay, our engineer, Gene Deininger, noticed a red Athabasca Airways farm wall tractor parked beside the airport hangar, covered in snow. Athabasca Airways said they'd sell it to him for $300, but good luck, because they hadn't started it in 5 years. Well, we were late on our return home, so Gene strapped it to the floor, dutifully declared it to customs when we got back to the States. The customs guy had seen just about everything he said, and he said, "Man, I'll tell you, good luck getting that started." Well, Gene got it started, farmed his land with it for a year, and sold it for $1,000 before he finally retired. I returned with Bonnie to Boreas and NASA 427 the second week of July '96. The weather was warm. I brought a bike for transits to and from the airport, and I shared cockpit pilot duties with guys from Dryden. The first was a fellow named Bill Brockett. He was easygoing, unflappable, and nice. He fit our crew perfectly and flew 2 missions with us for 6.7 hours before being called back to Dryden. Then entered Del Lewis. He was also from Dryden. Before he left, Bill warned me that Del was a good guy and a great pilot, but he could be really stubborn and really ornery. Well, Del fit the crew perfectly too, and we continued to rock throughout the rest of the mission. Del and I hooked up with a softball team. We'd go out and watch their ball games in the evening. They even invited Del to umpire for them once or twice, which he did. Hoagie in one hand and his beer behind the grass at the front of the bleachers. He'd have to stop occasionally just to make sure his beer was still there. Del and I flew the 7 Boreas missions for 21.3 hours. And again, each morning Pierce would climb into Eyeball and head out to report the weather conditions. One morning he fired her up and she sounded a little rough. Opened his window and went, "Doesn't look good." He let it run for a moment and the engine smoothed out and he said, "Right then, off we go." And away he went. It was during that deployment that, of course, as everybody knows, Del was selected for Pierce was selected for the astronaut program, and had to leave for Houston that very same day. He went on straight to Houston. His wife had to pack him out of out of Greenbelt, and flying his Eyeball mission was his last official airport duty before he left for the astronaut program. I will make one comment here. I suffice it to say that upon his return in Eyeball that very last day, Bonnie Maxfield, Bill Brockett, Carol Russell, and I sent him off to the future of his astronautical history in a very grand style. Enough said about that. If he was here, he'd probably go, "Oh yeah, I know." He'd probably tell you exactly what it was. But NASA 427 remained in Prince Albert through the end of July. Phil Dabney did some ancillary research by throwing quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies into the airport urinal to see if anyone would fish them out. And I did. Now, Phil's response was, "Man, they don't pay you enough, do they, Chris?" Which I agreed with. And when he explained his thesis, and I quote, "When reaching a finite monetary value, it will result in coins remaining in the urinal." Well, I conferred scientifically with Bonnie and Del, who then went to him and said, "The true subject value was elusive and must always be succinctly determined prior to experimentation." I didn't know anything about that, but I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, despite being pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters, they also were stamped with the words United States of America. And no way, shape, or form was anybody going to leave those words in a Canadian toilet. That was probably my greatest, research contribution to Boreas. I'm pretty proud of it. I was going to make some slides and recreate the situation for today, but the guys kept looking at me funny every time I pulled the camera out. Del and I returned to Wallops on August 1st. We cleared customs in Duluth, this time without a tractor, which was good. We did, however, have a researcher named Earl Palmer. Now, if you don't know Earl, just imagine Duck Dynasty with brains and sass, a lot of sass. The commander of the Minnesota Air National Guard flew his F-16 all the way from St. Paul to meet us when we landed. They parked us right in front of where he stood at parade rest, crisp as a magazine cover. We climbed down from the deck, Del and I, galloped out the door, hurried across the tarmac to where he stood, afraid we'd done something really bad. He thanked us for clearing there at Duluth, and he invited us to sample their great state and call him personally if we didn't get outstanding service. Now those are humbling words. Until Earl Palmer walked up behind us, slapped the general on his general shoulder star, and said, through his big, magnificent beard, "Hey, bud." Well, can. NASA 427 is a class act, and Boreas was a mission that our crew members have always happily remembered. Now, a quick sub-note, and then I'm done. And I'll read this. In August 1998, en route to Edwards Air Force Base, California, NASA 427 experienced a double engine failure within 5 minutes. Willie Dykes and I were the pilots. 6 additional crew members, 18 researchers in the back. We made an emergency landing in Southern California without injury or damage. Members of the crew received various NASA awards. One of our crew chiefs, Jeff Segrist, received the NASA Silver Snoopy, which is presented by an astronaut of choice. Jeff immediately chose Pierce, who had yet to fly in space and wanted Jeff to know that. But Jeff didn't care a bit about space. He remembered Boreas. He remembered the way Pierce treats everyone with dignity, respect, as an equal, and with enthusiasm. And I remember that too. I thank everyone who participated in Boreas, and especially Pierce, for the opportunity of Boreas, for his friendship, and for all the things he still has to do to make this world a better place. Thank you.